Life beyond our planet has long captivated human imagination. The possibility of extraterrestrial beings pondering their own existence, just as we do, sparks widespread curiosity. The modern fascination with UFOs reached a pivotal moment in 1947, a year marked by two groundbreaking events that would forever change how we view potential alien encounters. On June 21st, Captain Harold Dahl was patrolling the waters near Maury Island, Washington, with his son and dog. What began as a routine sea patrol quickly transformed into an extraordinary experience. While scanning the sky from his boat, Dahl spotted 6 unusual aircraft hovering approximately 2,000 feet above his watercraft. The vessels appeared unique, made of a reflective material and shaped like flat donuts, each about 100 feet in diameter. Large circular windows lined their sides, and center holes roughly 25 feet wide were clearly visible. 5 of these craft began circling a 6th, which gradually descended toward Dahl's patrol boat. Panic swept through the crew, who feared an imminent collision. They hastily navigated toward shore, seeking safety. Once on land, Dahl retrieved his binoculars and camera, determined to document this strange encounter. For approximately 5 minutes, the lower craft remained stationary while the other 5 continued their circular pattern. Suddenly, the craft halted about 500 feet above the water. One of the circling ships approached the stationary vessel and they maintained this position briefly. Dahl then heard a series of thumps. Through his binoculars, he observed the middle aircraft seemingly dropping what he believed were newspapers from its central opening as it drew closer to his location. This incident would become a pivotal moment in UFO research, sparking global speculation about potential extraterrestrial visitation. Experience involving strange airships. During his patrol, metal and rock debris rained down around his boat, creating a dangerous scene. A piece struck his dog, killing it instantly, and another wounded his son in the arm. Unable to call for help due to a malfunctioning radio, the crew sought cover below deck. Most of the debris splashed into the water, and the airships eventually rose high into the sky, moving westward together. After examining the boat and finding minimal damage, they sailed back to their dock, unceremoniously disposing of the dog's body overboard. Dahl took his injured son to the hospital for treatment. Afterward, he explained the incident to his boss, Fred Crispman, who initially did not believe him. When Dahl's patrol photos were developed and examined, the strange airships appeared to be nothing more than film noise or radiation damage. Determined to prove the incident's authenticity, Dahl returned to the island to collect rock samples from the area where he had encountered the aircraft. While gathering the rocks, he noticed one of the airships hovering above him, seemingly watching his movements. The next day, a pale man in a black suit approached Dahl and suggested they have breakfast together. During their meal, the stranger provided a detailed account of Dahl's previous day's experience. He warned Dahl that continuing the investigation or discussing the incident would result in dire consequences for him and his family. Despite the ominous warning, Dahl remained committed to uncovering the truth. He showed Crispman the metal fragments he had found within the rock samples, hoping to validate his extraordinary account of the mysterious airships and their strange encounter. Not. A package was sent to Ray Palmer, a publisher in Chicago who later founded Fate magazine. The contents included metal fragments and statements about strange incidents that occurred on the 21st and 22nd of June, an event we continue to discuss and debate to this day. Less than a month later, the most famous alien encounter in history would unfold. On July 8, 1947, in the small town of Roswell, New Mexico, reports emerged of a flying disc crashing into the desert near Walker Air Base. These reports quickly made global headlines. According to the accounts, bodies of aliens were retrieved from the crash site and transported to Area 51 in the Nevada desert, where autopsies were subsequently performed. Initially, high military authorities released a statement acknowledging the reality of a flying saucer. An intelligence officer at Roswell Army Airfield claimed possession of one of these saucers, which sent newspaper reports and news headlines into a frenzy worldwide. However, just 24 hours later, military authorities dramatically reversed their narrative. They claimed the initial report was a mistake and what they had found was actually a weather balloon. Surprisingly, the public seemed to accept this explanation, and discussion about the Roswell incident largely disappeared for many years. It wasn't until the late 1970s that military personnel involved began speaking out. This prompted ufologists and conspiracy theorists to intensify their investigations, ultimately developing the Roswell case into the legendary incident we know today. Major Jesse Marcel was among the first military personnel to speak about the event. He was one of 2 military personnel sent to investigate the crash site, alongside Sheridan Cavett. Marcel described large amounts of metallic debris scattered across the area, indicating the craft had hit the ground at high speed. He adamantly maintained it was not a weather balloon, aircraft, or missile, based on the fragments he recovered. Marcel, the head of intelligence and lead investigator of the 509 bombing group, frequently shared details about the Roswell incident with his family. During dinner, he would talk about his experiences, continuously answering questions about what he had discovered. Decades later, the National Security Agency published a report in 1994, 47 years after the initial incident. The report claimed that the alien bodies supposedly recovered from the crash site were actually life-size test dummies. This explanation only fueled more conspiracy theories, with many seeing it as a government attempt to cover up the situation. More witnesses came forward, including a photographer who was asked to document the crash site. He described being directed to photograph a dark-tinted area where he observed 4 identical bodies with enormous heads and shadowy skin. After taking the pictures, he was debriefed in order to forget everything he had seen. A significant breakthrough came in 2005 when Lieutenant Walter Ho, the man who originally published the weather balloon report in 1947, made a stunning declaration before his death. In a sworn affidavit, Ho claimed the weather balloon story was a cover-up for a recovered UFO. He also confirmed seeing dead alien bodies during the Roswell incident. Marcel himself had earlier reported discovering metal fragments that were incredibly thin yet strong, unlike anything he had seen before. He indicated that not only did he analyze one set of fragments, but others were also being preserved in a military installation. With these incidents raising numerous speculations, one might wonder if the truth will ever be fully known. As the years pass and witnesses fade away, we seem to be drifting further from a definitive understanding of what truly occurred. 2 encounters have emerged that might be the most significant gateway to extraterrestrial debates, potentially representing the biggest government cover-ups in human contact with otherworldly beings. While these specific events are most renowned, thousands of reported encounters persist to this day. These next 15 stories represent only a glimpse of an ongoing phenomenon. Governments continue to shy away from providing definitive answers, leaving us to marvel at the mysterious circumstances surrounding these incidents. One night, while home alone, I experienced something strange. My significant other was traveling out of state, and our 2 indoor cats were nowhere to be found. It was a summer evening, typically warm, but something felt distinctly off. I awoke to an inexplicable coldness, despite being wrapped in blankets. My phone seemed malfunctional when I tried to check the time. Walking to adjust the thermostat, I noticed an eerie silence. No cats, no normal household sounds. The Nest thermostat showed no power, and the entire house seemed electrically compromised. Curiously, looking out the upstairs window, I saw my neighbor's outdoor lights functioning normally. This entire sequence lasted perhaps 2 minutes. Descending the stairs, I encountered a peculiar light glow on the first floor. A faint humming emerged, a high-pitched noise with strange, arbitrary low-frequency pulses reminiscent of a muffled, irregularly throttled weed whacker. As I continued downward, a dark, slow-moving figure came into view. I woke up to my phone's alarm, everything seemingly back to normal. My cat was lazily sprawled next to me as I tried to piece together the bizarre 2-minute incident from the middle of the night. I know I'm not a sleepwalker, and this definitely wasn't a dream. When I checked my security system app, I noticed something strange. The front door had been opened and closed multiple times throughout the night. The app showed the system was disarmed, which I knew I hadn't done before going to bed. Reviewing the exterior camera footage was even more puzzling. There was absolutely no record of anything, just a random car around 10 p.m. and another in the morning. Something or someone had clearly entered and exited my house, but the cameras captured nothing. I reached out to my neighbor across the street, making up a story about a potential truck break-in. He reported something equally weird. His cameras also had a complete time gap that night. This wasn't adding up. One detail stuck out clearly in my memory. A red pickup truck parked in the wrong direction in front of the neighbor's house. I've always been particular about parking. I've gotten tickets before for similar violations. The truck wasn't there when I went to sleep, according to earlier footage, but it was present when I saw it during the night. When I woke up, everything felt off. I was cold, my phone wasn't working, and the thermostat seemed strange. I distinctly remembered seeing the truck from the window before being somehow warped on the stairs. Additional oddities caught my attention. The downstairs light was on when it had been off before, and my entire body smelled like burned marshmallows, which I knew was incredibly weird. Something had definitely happened that night, but I couldn't explain what. I had this wild experience that lasted a year, filled with strange events I can't fully explain or remember. It all started during a winter project up north where our crew stayed at a motel about 10 minutes from the nearest town. I lucked out with a king-sized room that had couches, which quickly became my clothing storage. Jeans and hoodies were piled everywhere. I brought my entire desktop computer and was deep in a late-night Facebook Messenger argument with my ex around 1 a.m. during my second week there. Suddenly, I woke up sitting on a pile of hoodies on the couch. The time was now 4 o'clock a.m. My ex had sent numerous messages and missed calls throughout the night, and I'd stopped typing mid-sentence. I couldn't figure out how it ended up on the couch instead of in bed. A few days later, something even stranger happened. My usual routine was to finish work, return to the motel around 9 p.m., shower, change, and drive to Boston Pizza, the only restaurant open late besides McDonald's. This night seemed normal at first. I showered, changed, and headed to my car. But when I turned the key, something felt off. The clock read 2 a.m. Somehow, I'd lost about 4 hours between showering and getting in the car. My entire body felt weird. I felt violated, similar to how assault victims describe feeling, a sense of something happening without any memory or explanation. Speaking of strange occurrences, there was this incident with my 55-gallon fish tank. It sat at the bottom of the stairs in the entryway, and I noticed it was missing 2/3 of its water. Incredibly, the entire area around the tank was completely dry, and the fish were perfectly fine. It was like some thirsty aliens had played mind games with me. I stayed up all night, terrified and trying to understand what had happened. Why had I lost those hours? If I'd passed out, why wasn't I on the floor? Why did I feel so violated? For the rest of the project, nothing else unusual occurred, but these events left me deeply unsettled. Here's a rewritten version. Strange things started happening after I got home. For the first month, everything seemed normal, but then something unusual began to shift in my life. I started experiencing intense sleep disruptions. Every night around 2 a.m., I would wake up and feel unable to fall back asleep until sunrise. During these moments, I felt compelled to turn on every light in the apartment and stay awake, waiting for dawn. My dreams became increasingly bizarre. Strangers would appear with urgent messages, insisting I needed to wake up. If I tried to ignore them, they would persistently harass me, emphasizing the critical importance of waking up. One particularly vivid dream stands out. I was dressed up and had driven to an upscale hotel. As I approached my room, someone began knocking repeatedly, shouting, "Hello!" over and over. Just before I was about to open the door, the phone rang. The voice on the line warned me not to open the door. Despite my desire to investigate the knocking, the phone voice kept urging me to stay put. Eventually, I hung up, approached the door, opened it, and woke up drenched in cold sweat. These dreams were characterized by random people trying to wake me in sudden bright white flashes that would illuminate everything, regardless of the dream's setting or time of day. Sometimes in the middle of a sunny day, a white flash would overpower the sun and a stranger would rush up to me, insisting the flash wasn't part of the dream and that I needed to wake up. Before these dreams, I would experience an overwhelming urge to sleep early. I would suddenly feel compelled to drop everything, leaving games mid-play, abandoning meals, and march to bed in a zombie-like state of drowsiness. I would invariably wake up around 2 a.m. and remain awake until sunrise. During one summer, while traveling with a friend in upstate New York and staying at a motel, these experiences continued. The strange dreams and disrupted sleep patterns followed me, creating an unsettling and inexplicable pattern. I was getting really strange sleep patterns that were messing with my life. Multiple times a week, I'd get these weird urges to go to sleep that felt almost uncontrollable. When these feelings hit, I'd fight back by driving downtown to busy areas filled with people. Somehow, being around others would make the sleepiness instantly disappear. One night, I woke up sitting in my office chair around 6 a.m. After checking, the door was locked and nothing seemed disturbed. I asked my friend if he'd heard any knocking during the night, but he said no. He got angry that I'd wake him up talking about answering the door to a stranger, especially since there was no evidence anyone had even been there. I still felt like I was awake when I went to answer the door. The strangest part was how these sleep disruptions were becoming a pattern, happening 2 or 3 times weekly. I was getting so paranoid that I started keeping all lights on, closing all blinds, and fighting to stay awake during nighttime hours. Recently, I've developed an intense fear of gray alien images. Seeing them, even cartoon versions on shows like South Park, triggers severe panic attacks. This is new. These pictures never bothered me before. I haven't had a recurrence of those strange sleep events, but I'm still anxious about sleeping until sunrise. There's also this unsettling memory of a night at a motel in upstate New York that felt more like a missing time event than a dream. Most people I've told don't know what to make of my experiences. My current girlfriend has noticed how obsessed I've become with ensuring everything feels secure. I still have no explanation for the missing time or these bizarre occurrences. No blinds are closed with no open slivers no matter where I sleep. At a party, I once told someone a story about a guy who shared his abduction experience. He was convinced that I had been abducted during that year, and they'd either gotten bored or I became a hassle by constantly trying to drive to places full of people to avoid these happenings. Other friends either offered no explanation or believed some sort of abduction scenario was taking place. Who knows? I have no memory of physically being abducted, but those weird feelings of being watched, being urged to sleep, and feeling violated when waking up felt real and still bother me. During my junior year in college, I had a strange experience. First, some background. My dorm room was attached to my roommate's, so I had to go through her space to reach the bathroom or hallway. She was a light sleeper, but I wasn't the type to be out late, so it didn't matter. I had 2 normal operations in my life at that time and discovered that while under anesthesia, I would wake up briefly toward the end before I was supposed to. If I got a mosquito bite, I'd deal with it for at least a month. I'm not a fast healer. One night, I had the most vivid dream of my life. I woke up briefly somewhere else and then went right back to sleep. In this dream, I looked left, looked right, and then passed back out, just like in surgery. I was on a hospital, gurney slightly inclined and facing the wall. An ambient noise was behind me and the echo suggested a very large room. There was nothing sinister about the noises. On either side of me was a row of empty gurneys. To my right, 2 people were having a conversation sitting on a bench against the wall. One was a person in a dark suit. The other was something I couldn't identify. It was small, and I saw its hands, which appeared to have darker grayish skin. They were speaking together, animated and excited like old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. They didn't notice me. Wake up! I didn't recognize the dialogue, though I can usually recognize languages like German, Mandarin, or Russian. This language was wholly unrecognizable, yet the person in the suit was fluent. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I told myself it was a messed up dream and went to shower as I passed my roommate who was still in bed. She asked where I'd gone last night, which I found odd. After my shower, I started putting on my makeup and noticed something on my face. I leaned closer and could not believe what I saw. In 1996, I encountered something I'd never seen before. 2 perfectly parallel lines appeared on my skin, with what seemed like a clear hard gel on top. The cuts were precise, and despite their depth, there was no blood. My hair was thicker than the width of these lines, yet I could see clearly into my skin. Back then, I might describe it now as a laser cut topped with liquid Band-Aid, though neither was common at the time. I tried to rationalize the marks. I often did homework in bed, so I thought maybe I'd rolled onto a staple or paper clip. I searched my pillow thoroughly but found nothing. Desperate for an explanation, I grabbed a sewing needle, a staple, and a paper clip. I disinfected them with hydrogen peroxide and made similar cuts on my face. Immediately, blood welled up and the skin looked jagged. The cuts from these objects were wider than the original lines. I realized nothing in my room could have created those precise marks. Though I didn't own an X-Acto knife, I knew the blood would react similarly if I had. I skipped my first class trying to understand what had happened. All day, I obsessively touched my face, mesmerized by the perfection of these mysterious cuts. Photography was complicated then. Only 2 people on campus owned a digital camera, so I'd need to borrow a friend's 35mm camera. This meant explaining the situation and potentially dealing with Photoshop when the pictures were developed. Who would I even show? Who would believe me? In those days, mentioning aliens made you an outcast. After hours of mental debate, I gave up and finished my classes. That night, sitting on my bed, I remained unsure what to do. By morning, the cuts had completely vanished. Not even a scar remained. I was disturbed for a few days, but eventually forgot about the incident. Years later, while getting dental work, I had full facial x-rays at 2 different offices. During one appointment, I noticed something strange above my teeth. When I asked the technician about it, pointing out what seemed like a mirror image on the same side as my old cuts, I learned it was indeed on that specific side. The first time I noticed something odd was during a dental x-ray. There was a square image above my teeth that looked strange. The first dentist didn't seem bothered by it, which made me think it was just some technical issue with the x-ray plates. So I went to a second dentist and orthodontist, and guess what? The same square appeared in exactly the same spot. This time, I was direct. I pointed at the square and asked what it was. The technician looked at me oddly and leaned in close, whispering something that gave me chills. We see these all the time. This happened in Washington, and I started wondering about the x-ray. Could the negatives or plates be damaged in exactly the same spots? I don't know much about x-rays, but something felt off. I began reflecting on my situation. It reminded me of how we treat other species, chasing them in helicopters, shooting tranquilizer darts, taking blood samples and tagging them without considering their trauma. But in my case, if something did happen, it seemed different. I was handled carefully with no pain and my cuts healed instantly. If this was some kind of research or data collection, they treated me with more respect than we typically treat other species on our planet. When I go through airport security, I sometimes try to see if anything shows up on the x-ray, but I never notice anything. Surprisingly, I'm okay with this. I think it might just be science. Nothing sinister. Sure, I wish someone had asked my head. Consent first, but how do you ask consent from someone who isn't supposed to exist? This all takes me back to my childhood in Collinsville, Mississippi, where I used to see strange lights while living on a farm in the countryside. Well, Washington State, out near Beacon Rock. One night I was looking out over the pasture from the front porch. What I thought was the full moon kept getting bigger and moving left to right across the tree line. When I turned to get my big brother, it vanished. He didn't believe me and punched me in the arm. The next week I went camping in the woods surrounding our few hundred acres. My Walker Hound and Australian Shepherd would accompany me as I wandered for about an hour, finding a nice clearing by a small creek. As darkness fell and I started the fire, my dog began acting strange. The Walker Hound grew loud. Suddenly, I was in my tent early in the morning. The tent was partially open, birds hadn't yet begun singing, and the fire was completely out. My Walker Hound was gone, and my Australian Shepherd whined outside. Something felt terribly wrong. I got up and vomited near the tent. Though fully clothed, my boots were on the wrong feet. When I removed them to correct this, I noticed my socks were wet. Terror gripped me. A new sensation in these familiar woods. At 11 years old, with a lifetime of woodland experience, I'd never felt such fear. I grabbed my .22 rifle and sprinted home through the woods, leaving everything behind. My dog and I ran without stopping until I broke through the pasture. My mom was waiting, crying. My dad and brothers had been searching for me. She told me my walker had come home around 11 p.m. that night, and the dog hadn't left my side since I'd gotten him as a pup. They knew something was wrong. She went to our red Suburban and laid on the horn to signal my dad that I'd returned, years before cell phones existed. I described what happened, but she seemed to brush it off. Days later, fresh out of the shower, I noticed 2 small punctures on my right ankle. They looked like a tiny red snake bite. This detail, embarrassing as it might be to admit, felt significant. That night in the woods was strange. Something peculiar happened. A match on my left foot, exactly where previous marks had appeared years before. When I was 5 or 6, my mom had discovered me sleepwalking outside near the mailbox around 10 p.m. No one could explain how I'd escaped the house. My father repeatedly told this story with such a serious expression that I couldn't tell if it was truth or myth, but my grandmother remembered the incident clearly. Back then, she was known simply as Mother, with 3 children, including my future father. They lived deep in Michigan's remote wilderness, preparing for a kid-free weekend. My grandfather was dropping the children off with relatives. When he returned, the house was eerily dark. That kind of silence where everything feels unsettling and isolated. Despite the strange atmosphere, they had a normal evening and fell asleep without trouble. Bright flashes through their tiny window soon woke them. They rushed to the kitchen and opened the back door to investigate. My grandfather, trying to be brave, told his wife to stay back. Suddenly, an array of colors appeared. a weirdly shaped circle floating just above the ground. As his eyes adjusted, he realized the lights were coming from an unusual aircraft, almost football-shaped but slightly rounder. The craft was small enough to fit between trees, yet large enough to hold a family. The bright, flashing colors made it difficult to determine the material's actual color. A two-legged creature approached, seemingly human-like but nude and without visible genitals. Its head was elongated, with bulging eyes. That could barely pass as human. It extended a hand, holding it still as if waiting for a high five. My grandmother joined him outside, both witnessing this extraordinary moment together. Her face made him realize they weren't dreaming when a strange human-like creature put its hand down. Another one of their kind appeared, walking out on the same platform where the first stood. This creature protruded from an aircraft, holding what seemed to be a flat substance. The original creature took it and began nervously offering it to my grandparents. My grandfather reached out, but the creature quickly pulled back and instead extended the item to my grandmother. She looked at her husband, unsure whether to accept this mysterious gift. Eventually she did. The substance felt squishy and round, like a larger pancake. The creature then brought out another pancake-like substance for themselves and started eating. They watched my grandparents, waiting for them to do the same. Without hesitation, each took a bite. They realized it must have been made from some type of wheat or grain unlike anything seen on Earth. A different odd grain from wherever these creatures originated. After my grandparents sampled the pancake, the creatures gave a final wave and retreated into their craft. The platform vanished, and the flashing colors began to fade into the sky. I always asked them, "What did you do with the pancake? Did you give it to the government? Did you report anything?" Both my grandfather and grandmother explained that back then, reporting such an encounter would have made people think they were crazy. To clarify, I didn't believe I was abducted, but my friend did. I was about 15 when Jay and I would sneak out around midnight, returning home between 4 o'clock and 5 a.m. before our parents woke up for work. One particular night, we just snuck out around 1 a.m. and headed to my backyard. We laid on the trampoline staring at the stars and talking as usual. The sky suddenly transformed. Where normally you'd see defined corners and sharp edges, it began to look different. From the southeast corner, a giant UFO appeared, huge, occupying a quarter of the entire sky. We stared in dead silence. The craft made no noise as it moved and spun. Its movement was strange, not like a frisbee, but with sides turning while hovering perfectly still. Jay and I were completely focused, not uttering a single word as something approached. We flipped over without any indication or communication. No hints, no talking, no eye contact. We simply turned onto our stomachs and stayed as flat and quiet as possible. Ducking might seem normal and instinctive, but this was different. It felt like pure telepathy. We had an unspoken mental conversation. Stay flat, don't move, watch it. Something made a weird angled C shape across the sky. Although everything seemed to move in slow motion, it probably lasted just a few minutes. We held our breath the entire time. The moment it disappeared, everything changed. We had just entered the yard. I knew it was 1:15 a.m. because I'd checked, but suddenly it was bright. Like 7:30 or 8 a.m. afterward, we barely communicated. Just a quick eye contact, then we rushed home before our parents could notice our absence. Weeks, maybe months later, I mentioned this to my brother's girlfriend. She was deeply interested, but also terrified. She pointed out something strange. The fact that what felt like minutes actually turned out to be 6 or 7 hours made her convinced we were abducted. When I joked about hypnotherapy to unblock memories, she seriously responded that people who are abducted are often traumatized by their experiences. In another incident, I was camping in a North Georgia campground with friends. When it started raining heavily, everyone abandoned their tents and moved to an on-site cabin. I chose to sleep in my car, exhausted from kayaking and wanting to avoid the late-night socializing. I woke up when the rain stopped, feeling cold. I'd forgotten my sleeping bag in the tent. Checking the cabin, I saw everyone asleep around 3 a.m. Not wanting to disturb them, I decided to retrieve my sleeping bag. Using a small pen light, I navigated through the darkness, passing other tents. Mine was the last one, about 50 feet from the previous tent. I finally reached it, covered myself with the sleeping bag, and prepared to catch the last few hours of sleep. Not more than 10 or 15 minutes from settling into my tent, strange sounds began. Outside the tent door, voices spoke in an unfamiliar language, something I couldn't recognize or identify. As these voices started, two orbs suddenly appeared together. They weren't like typical flashlight glares, and their colors were hard to describe. More of a diffuse, indistinct, colorful presence. The whispers outside grew more animated, arguing quietly but intensely. The lights started moving in an unnatural way, swirling around the tent behind me, to the side, and in front. This wasn't any movement you could create with flashlights, and I realized no footsteps accompanied the sounds. Terrified, I knelt on the tent floor, preparing for something unknown. My mind raced through potential actions, fight or flight. I was sweating despite the cold heart pounding. Suddenly, everything stopped. The lights shut off like someone flipped a switch, and the whispers vanished, leaving only silence in the empty woods. I remained completely still, not daring to leave the tent until sunrise. It remains the scariest moment of my life. This happened when I was around 11 or 12, around 2009 or 2010, during a time I often stayed with my great-grandparents in northwest Georgia's Chattanooga County, a rural area with just a few thousand residents. I was there shortly before my great-grandfather passed away from cancer. I'm uncertain if this was a humanoid encounter or simply an extremely vivid dream. What made it unique was how lucid and realistic it felt. Unlike most dreams where I feel compelled, in this experience I was fully aware and in control, able to feel and sense everything around me with remarkable clarity. No large house at the end of a quiet rural road, barely a handful of homes scattered around. Near a peaceful lake and park, around 1 a.m., I decided to get up from bed and walk down the long hallway to the living room for a glass of water. The kitchen connects directly to the living room, and I moved down the hall as usual. But when I reached the doorless entry, something felt off. Time seemed to slow, and the moonlight streaming through our large side windows looked slightly distorted. I noticed the living room lights were on, but not quite right. A yellowish glow seemed different from the familiar illumination I'd known all my life. As I walked around the corner, thinking I'd figured out what was bothering me, I was wrong. About 6 or 7 feet away stood a tall figure in a dark cloak. Two much smaller figures flanked him, but they vanished the moment I tried to focus on them. I couldn't be certain of their appearance. The smaller ones resembled classic gray shapes, but they faded into an indescribable static-like presence. Imagine a shape dissolving like television static or hastily scribbled drawings. My eyes darted between the tall figure and the smaller ones, which seemed to disappear and reappear. The tall figure became more unnerving when alerted. From behind, he was incredibly tall, nearly touching the ceiling, and forced to hunch slightly to avoid hitting his head. Strangely, his black cloak only extended to the height of a normal person when viewed from behind. But when he turned around, everything changed. He appeared even taller, with what seemed like an invisible head. The entire environment warped, intensifying the earlier sense that something was fundamentally wrong with this space. And here is the rewritten text. When he turned around, something strange happened. He seemed to grow taller, and I felt completely frozen. His gaze locked onto me with an unexpected surprise, and all sound disappeared around us. Years later, I can describe that smell with certainty. Back then, I couldn't identify it, but after spending time with my great-granddad in the hospital and attending his funeral, I recognized it immediately. It was the smell of death. Not a horrible stench, but a thick, morbid atmosphere that seemed to permeate the air. His face was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Incredibly white, not bright, but an unnatural pure white without any blemishes or variations. He looked like a standard gray alien, with a large conical head, small mouth, and tiny nose holes. But his almond-shaped eyes were the most terrifying part. They seemed alien, like something that didn't belong in our three-dimensional world, almost as if they were from another dimension entirely. I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I could only stand there. An overwhelming feeling consumed me that I shouldn't be in this exact place at this precise moment. Wearing a black cloak, he leaned towards me with an elongated arm and thin fingers. His mouth seemed to expand, stretching wider than seemed possible. As his hand crept closer to my face, I was certain he was going to destroy me. Not physically, but something deeper. As an atheist, I suddenly felt I had a soul, and he was going to steal it completely. Just as he touched my face, I lost consciousness. When I woke the next morning, the terror of that moment remained, a sense of absolute annihilation that went beyond mere physical harm. Here's the rewritten script. Something was wrong the moment I woke up. My surroundings weren't as I remembered them when I had fallen asleep. The water I wanted to get became secondary to a growing sense of fear that this wasn't just a simple dream. Originally, I had gone to sleep in my bed in a room down the hall from the living room. Instead, I found myself in an awkward position on the living room couch, early in the morning, probably around 6 or 7 a.m., based on the light filtering through the windows. I returned to my bedroom and crawled back into bed. Only then did I fully process what had just happened. Completely terrified, I pulled a blanket over myself and waited, listening until I heard my great-grandma cooking bacon in the kitchen. That's when I finally emerged from my room and went back to the living room. 2 years passed. My great-grandfather had died, and I was older now. The encounter from that night began haunting my dreams. These dreams came frequently, especially in the initial period after the first experience. I would wake up in a cold sweat, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. The second encounter played out similarly. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I got up to grab a Dr. Pepper from the kitchen. Midway down the hallway, I remembered that night and froze. That same unsettling aura returned, the one I'd felt before my first encounter. I tried to turn back, to retreat to my room or to my great-grandma or grandparents' room, but I couldn't move. Something compelled me forward, and surprisingly, I felt calm despite knowing something was about to happen. In the living room, the tall figure was already facing me. This time he was alone. No distinctive smell lingered, but a faint humming, possibly from a highway car, filled the air. He seemed more approachable, yet performed the exact same actions as before. I was certain he was the one controlling my movements, drawing me into the room. He studied me for a moment with a small smile before putting me to sleep with his hand. When I woke up on the couch, I felt different. The horror had subsided, replaced by a growing curiosity about why this was happening. Something felt predetermined, like fate was weaving an unavoidable pattern. I was certain our encounters would continue regardless of my wishes. Throughout the years, I couldn't clearly recall meeting him again, but he persistently appeared in my dreams. I moved twice, yet he remained constant. His visits followed a strange rhythm. Sometimes a single dream appearance, other times recurring for 3 consecutive nights. On the 4th night after the 3rd dream, I waited vigilantly in my living room, hoping to see him. But he never materialized. Instead, I awoke in an inexplicable position, upside down against the couch, legs suspended in air, upper back on the floor. Blankets were scattered around me haphazardly. Apparently, he had rendered me unconscious before I could witness whatever mysterious actions he was conducting. His purpose remained unknown, leaving me deeply unsettled. With each dream encounter, my surprise diminished. The hooded figure in my dream had promised we would meet again, and I found myself anticipating our next interaction. In 1997, a remarkable incident occurred during a late-night drive. 3 friends and I were traveling a winding route when something extraordinary happened. Around 10 p.m. in the cold New Hampshire winter, strange lights began appearing. Directly in front of our car, bright lights dilated and then contracted. We crawled to a stop, all of us astonished. 4 or 5 lights appeared, growing to the brightness of police searchlights before vanishing completely. We pulled over at a shared driveway overlooking a frozen reservoir, solid enough to support a truck. With just the 4 of us present in the freezing cold, we exited the vehicle, hoping to observe the lights again. We saw lights, but they behaved differently than before. High above us, massive elongated lights hung in the air. About a dozen of them drifted slowly in various directions, occasionally shifting in brightness. But what truly startled us were the smaller lights, bright as stars, that would emerge from the sides of these larger shapes. These smaller lights would exit 4 or 6 at a time, moving with incredible speed and agility. They darted back and forth, side to side, changing directions instantly. Sometimes they would squiggle erratically before stopping or moving in tandem with others. As some retreated to the larger shapes, new lights would emerge from different areas, creating a constant, dynamic display. The scene was so intense it felt like a choreographed dance of light. Even now, the memory remains vivid, as if it happened just yesterday. We stayed outside for an hour, enduring the cold until we could bear it no longer. My friends dropped me off at the bottom of my half-mile-long, poorly maintained driveway to avoid getting stuck on the ice. I was embarrassed about my home life. My dad was an alcoholic, and we lived off the grid. After they left, I looked up but saw nothing. The trees obscured my view. Suddenly, a deep panic overwhelmed me. I was horrified and still in shock from what we'd witnessed. Afraid to be alone outside, I ran up the icy driveway and rushed to my room. probably unable to sleep. In the first few days after the incident, we all seemed stunned, but we never really discussed it with anyone at school. About 7 or 8 years later, I met up with a couple of friends and cautiously asked if they remembered. I was terrified I might have imagined the whole thing, or was going crazy. They both remembered the details exactly as I did, though we were all slightly embarrassed to discuss it. At the time, I was around 8 or 9 years old. We were on a day trip to meet my mom's high school friend. I brought my Game Boy Advance, hoping to impress her friend's kids with my racing game skills, something I'd overheard while my mom was chatting at her friend's house. They told me to leave the room because they needed to talk about adult things. As a little, innocent, curious kid, I wondered what exactly these adult things were that I couldn't hear. Were they going to throw some new juicy cuss words? Well, my mom's friend had recently moved to a new house in North California. It was a suburban area with lots of empty homes and forest patches between communities. Their little girl was about 4 years old and had started sleepwalking at night. One night, after finding her in the backyard sitting alone, they decided to lock her in her room and bar up the windows to prevent her from wandering into the nearby woods. In the middle of the night, a loud boom shook the house. They checked on their boys, who were fine and hadn't heard anything, then went to check on their daughter. When they unlocked her door, she was gone. Panicking, they heard a knock at the door. Opening it, they found their 4-year-old sleepwalking daughter. When asked where she'd been, she pointed down the street and said, "With the men." The angry dad spotted 2 guys in coats walking down the street. He yelled and started sprinting after them. According to my mom's friend, the guys didn't react at all. When the dad turned the corner, they were gone. Mom and Dad checked the locks and windows. No tampering. They notified the police, who said they'd keep an eye out but couldn't do much. The sleepwalking daughter seemed unafraid and simply went back to bed. I wouldn't say I was abducted by aliens specifically, but I was definitely taken somewhere. It was more an abduction of consciousness, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if my body was involved too. It was a weird feeling I can't really explain. I was sitting in the park one day in broad daylight with 4 or 5 friends. It was a small Midwestern community, so the park was empty except for us. We were talking and smoking when suddenly everyone just slowed down and eventually froze completely, myself included. I couldn't move or talk. I couldn't even blink and had to focus hard just on breathing. Then I blacked out. I woke up alone in a dark, nearly pitch-black room with 3 large illuminated screens around me. Ninety had a series of experiences as a kid that felt completely surreal. It started when I was really young. Not scary, just odd dreams. Every night I'd sneak down to our living room with its big window. I'd face the window and say something, then a wolf head would appear and respond. My next memory would always be waking up. I was never caught leaving bed or going downstairs, but sometimes there would be leaves or dirt on the living room floor that my parents couldn't explain. When we moved to the suburbs, everything changed. I wasn't afraid in the country, but suburban life brought a different kind of terror about sleep. My first real abduction memory came during a doctor's visit. A classmate had gotten sick and everyone who would contact needed a shot. I'd never had one before, and when the nurse approached with the needle, I completely lost it. I was around 9 or 10, and it took 3 nurses and my pediatrician, Dr. Lee, to hold me down. I remember screaming to get that thing away from me, seeing shadowy figures and feeling flashes of pain in my eyes. After that, I was always aware when they came. I'd wake up to find them next to my bed or looking through the window. They never tried to hide their intentions. The abductions peaked around ages 13 and 14, happening about once every 2 months. Later, in a park, something bizarre happened. Screens showed us from above, and I felt like I was in that room for hours before blacking out. When I came to, I was crying on the ground. My friends looked equally shaken, as if we'd all experienced something terrifying. I was the first to speak, saying I thought I'd met God. Everyone responded with brief, cryptic statements. One girl mentioned we were on TV, which explained the feeling of being watched and violated. We didn't discuss details, just a single weird sentence each. It felt like we couldn't talk about it, where they might hear us. We left immediately and never spoke about it again. I've lost touch with those friends, but I've always wondered if they saw it as an abduction too. When I was younger, strange events started happening that disrupted my entire life. It began a pattern of immediately sleeping after school and waking around midnight, staying awake until school time, hoping these incidents would stop. This strategy didn't help my school or family situation. Over time, the occurrences became less frequent, happening maybe once a year. My last encounter was on my 27th birthday, and I was fully conscious during it. I had just called work to say I wouldn't be coming in that night. Walking outside to my car, I saw something moving through the sky. A black, shape-shifting object. At first, it resembled the space shuttle, but then it started moving towards me. I got into my car and tried starting it, but the engine wouldn't turn over right away. A jarring, painful buzzing filled my head. The craft was now directly over my car. Suddenly, one of the creatures materialized and moved towards me. My car door inexplicably opened, and something touched me with a rod-like device. I blacked out. An hour later, I went to work despite having called off earlier. Since then, I haven't had any more experiences, but I still live cautiously. I work at night and sleep during the day, which made relationships difficult. However, I'm doing much better now. I suspect my parents were aware something was happening when I was younger. I've had multiple experiences of waking up in different locations or wearing unfamiliar clothes. This wasn't my first encounter with these beings. I've had several that left me confused and frightened. My parents tried to help by sending me on a vacation to Turkey with my grandparents. They thought it would help me relax after a stressful year. I saw a therapist after my first experience, but no one believed my story. My grandparents have a small house in a remote village. The nearest neighbor is kilometers away, making isolation complete. The area has few trees, and June is always extremely hot, making nighttime sleep challenging. My grandparents were already asleep during this time. Despite the disbelief of others, I continue to believe in my experiences. There was nothing to watch on television, so I decided, end he day and sleep outside. Of course, I didn't actually go camping, but used the balcony instead. I didn't want to wake up with a snake around me. I grabbed some pillows and a few blankets and earned, he lights on. Sleeping in the dark isn't really something I enjoy, especially after many experiences I've had. He light was more for my own comfort than anything else. I already could feel something was off. I was suddenly colder outside a minute ago, and his awful feeling of being watched started to make me feel paranoid. I quickly looked back inside, saw nothing, and shrugged eye. I off hinking eye. Was making myself paranoid. Was at least what I have on my eyes ravel down. Oh, he garden. In he darkness, something way you familiar caught my eye. All gray figure stood below me. I couldn't miss eye. Very all and skinny. Definitely Allerhan, an average human. Its shoulders were very heen, and the arms reached down o' knees looking like hose oys. All I did was stare at me, and I stared back. I'm no sure how long his lasted. Well, when I blinked, he creature was suddenly closer hand before. When I knew I was here. I was frozen in fear as the alien moved its head. He sighed and backed straight as if curious about it. After a bye, I finally go he courage o do something instead of freaking out. I was a beer idea rea calmly. He first hain I did was wave my hand slowly. I only if I give, he same response back after. A few minutes I did as much as I could, rhyme no freak you. But I only became even more scared. I asked what I was doing here. Baha was when I felt my whole body becoming stiff. My mind was elling me scream for help. Have someone come and gee our creature away. I knew one thing for sure. I wanted something for me, something I had no idea about. When I asked he creature again why I was here, I only moved its head of his side. Then I moved closer, standing right underneath me, looking up with hose. Big black eyes. Now I could see a mouth, and I was shaking in fear, no knowing why I was standing as close. Suddenly, a loud voice of a man called for me, asking why I was doing on he balcony. Not a balcony late at night, my attention quickly shifted to the village police officer who routinely drove around after dark. When our eyes met, I swiftly looked back down. Suddenly, the alien had vanished. The officer noticed my distress. I was visibly shaking and nearly collapsing. All I could manage was telling him something was in the garden. He promptly entered to investigate but found nothing and called additional officers to search the surrounding area. My grandparents were awakened by the commotion. My grandfather, who harbors a fascination with alien encounters, bombarded me with questions. It seemed this wasn't the first such incident in our family, and these experiences were apparently quite common. While he didn't reveal much, I learned that my grandfather was, or possibly still is, an abductee. This occurred during my junior year of high school. Now in my second year of college, I recall that morning clearly. My school bus departed weekday mornings around 7:30, so I'd typically leave home at 7:15 for the short walk to the bus stop. That morning was dark, the sky clear, with sunrise yet to break. Standing among the usual group of students, I had been scrolling through my phone for about 5 minutes before growing bored. As I put my phone away, I began studying the dark morning sky. Suddenly, a large green, glowing orb appeared, seemingly accompanied by 2 or 3 smaller ones. They swiftly soared between tree lines and vanished behind a dense tree line facing a lake. The event was incredibly fast, silent, and left no trace. More confused than scared, I knew what I'd seen was real. Glancing around, I noticed the guy next to me frantically scanning the sky. When our eyes met, he asked if I'd seen something. I confirmed, but neither of us could explain it. No one else in the group had witnessed anything. The bus arrived, and we boarded. I was sitting in my physics class when something unusual happened. A girl behind me was talking loudly about strange flying objects she had seen that morning. When I turned and asked about their color, she said green. I mentioned that I had seen them too, and she became incredibly excited, grateful that someone else could confirm her experience. The morning was strange, and I wasn't expecting anyone to understand or believe me. But I wanted to share this story because it has stuck with me. It wasn't my only encounter of this kind, but it was definitely the first. I was relieved that 2 other people had witnessed the same thing, which made it feel more real. What made this experience even more intriguing was that the girl wasn't from my community. This suggested that whatever we saw must have been flying at a considerable altitude. Since then, I haven't seen anything quite like it. As I've gotten older, I've had several paranormal experiences. This particular incident occurred when I was around 21 or 22. I'm 30 now. At the time, I was renting a room in my friend's second-story house. My female boxer dog always slept with me. One night, something strange happened. My dog jumped on the bed, blocking my view of the television. I tried to move her with my feet, but she wouldn't budge. Instead, she started growling, facing the window. Frustrated, I turned off the TV and tried to sleep. Suddenly, an incredibly bright light was shooting through the blinds. Annoyed, I got up to see which car could be causing such intense illumination. As I put my fingers through the blinds to open them, everything went blank. When I was in a metallic room with perfectly curved walls and no seams. In front of me was a gray, rectangular metal bed. I sensed other entities guiding me, though not through spoken words. Our communication seemed to happen telepathically. Just as quickly, I was back in my bedroom, this time facing away from the window. The experience was surreal and has remained vivid in my memory ever since. The morning after that night, everything was a blur. I woke up feeling incredibly sick, with an overwhelming urge to throw up. Stumbling down the stairs, hunger also gnawed at me, so I reached for the milk to pour into my cereal. But something stopped me. Standing at the sink overlooking the backyard, I saw my dog running around. The dog that should have been in my room. Suddenly, memories came flooding back. I raced upstairs as fast as I could. My room was in complete disarray. Furniture was scattered everywhere. It was winter, and I typically slept with 3 blankets, which had been meticulously arranged into perfect spiral designs on my bed. I destroyed those spirals, unable to comprehend what had happened. Something fundamentally changed that day. I became dumber in a sense. My speech became stuttered, with me struggling to complete sentences. Reading became an arduous task. I could only understand text by reading it slowly, 3 or 4 times repeatedly. Almost a year later, I was alone in the house, relaxing in my bedroom. Suddenly, a bright light pierced through the room, and the house began to rumble. It felt like an earthquake. Fear gripped me because I recognized this light. Within 5 seconds, the rumbling stopped and everything returned to normal. Miraculously, my reading and speaking abilities recovered. Just like that, everything went back to how it was before. It was definitely one of the strangest experiences of my life. Whether life takes us near or far apart, our connection remains strong. Distance might separate us physically, but the bond we share transcends space and time. Our relationship isn't defined by constant presence, but by the depth of understanding and care we hold for each other. I know that even when we can't be together, our thoughts and feelings remain intertwined. This separation is just a temporary pause in our ongoing journey. So until we meet again, know that you're always in my heart, and our paths will cross once more. Take care, and I look forward to our next reunion, whenever and wherever that might be. We'll meet again, and when we do, it'll feel like no time has passed at all.